I wanted to shoot this video last weekend, but I was pretty beat last week. Plus, I was doing some other stuff with some friends, so actually ended up didn't shooting it. Plus, with my work schedule, I'm working a lot of hours, so really not wanting to actually shoot during the week. But hopefully, I won't be working as many hours shortly, so then I'll actually have more time to shoot on the weekend, especially on Saturday. Because Saturday's a good day for me because I'm actually working Monday to Friday schedules, so sometimes Saturday. So hopefully I'll be able to shoot on Saturday. And actually, I actually really want to go to shooting on every Saturday type thing because since I'm not willing and able to do the show as my primary thing that I do as my work, doing it and having just a once a week type show would be pretty good for me and for you, my viewers, because I think I give you guys some good information to consume, especially stuff that's not going to be in the mainstream media, and even stuff that a lot of other independent progressive media outlets won't really talk about as much. But this one has been talked about plenty of the other progressive media outlets, but I still want to talk about it because it's important. It's kind of old because it's from last month or maybe 3 weeks ago, but I did want to talk about Ilhan Omar and how she criticized AIPAC and how our government is beholden to the lobbyists for Israel. And it's really important that she said this because one, Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, they've been criticizing our political system and how it's structured and how it's really not representing people and how we need to make more progressive changes. But they haven't really talked about lobbyists specifically too much. So Ilhan Omar talking about specifically AIPAC is really having too much power over our federal government, especially Congress, is a really important thing to really let the American people know. Because sometimes if you don't hear any information, you're not really gonna be aware that that issue is a problem. Because Obama did renegotiate a monetary deal with Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu, but we'll give him, I want to say it was like at least $5 million over the next. I think the deal was we'll give the Israeli government around $10 billion over the next 10 years. Let me pull that up right now just to be sure. Because even though President Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu didn't really get along as well as other presidents did with the Israeli prime minister, I think that's his position. It's still important that we still agreed to give them just boatloads of money because it's just kind of showing that even though we're the world superpower, we're still kind of beholden to our government, still beholden to certain interests, like the Israeli government's big issue right now, and maybe even over the last few decades, is the Palestinians and how they're really brutalizing the Palestinian people and how it's just atrocious. And since they lobby us and we give them money, we're not really gonna criticize them and say, hey, you really need to lay off of the just open oppression of the people that live in your nation, in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, that kind of thing. Oh yeah, I just pulled it up. Yeah, the United States has agreed to give them at least $38 billion over the next 10 years. From what I understand, we've been giving Israel, millions and billions of dollars for at least a decade, maybe more. So that deal just I guess that deal just lengthened the time that we're gonna provide services, especially monetary services, to the Israeli government. And I also want to emphasize that we're actually not using that money to provide critical services that the American people need. So that's one reason why that's pretty important, and why Ilhan Omar should have, why it's important that she criticized AIPAC. Another thing is, she really shouldn't have backed down, because she was right on the policy of course, any lobbyist that give enough money to any representatives, a lot of times they'll eventually get their say in what kind of legislation gets passed. So hopefully in the future she'll hold her shape better and just be able to say, no, you're just deflecting, because even though she did talk about it's about the Benjamins, she wasn't making it an anti-Semitic insult or trying to make it some kind of anti-Semitic slur or statement about how Jewish people are gonna take over the whole world, you know, shit like that. She was just talking about how the lobbyists are buying their influence and how that's a problem for the people of the United States. Then I also really wanted to talk about how Ilhan Omar criticized Elliot Abrams during one of the committee hearings or the committee meetings. I think I'm going to put the clip in here, but she went hard at him because she talked about he committed all these atrocities by okaying and greenlighting all these, or at least one mass murder in Central America.
Thank you. Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
On February,
that was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February
a witness
8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes
will not
or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question, because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. That is my question. Will you make sure that human rights are not violated and that we uphold international and human rights?
I suppose there is a question in there, and the answer is that the entire thrust of American policy in Venezuela is to support the Venezuelan people's effort to restore democracy to their country. That's our policy.
I don't think anybody disputes that. The question I had for you is that does the interest of the United States include protecting human rights and include protecting people against genocide?
That is always the position of the United States.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Mr. Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are.
And that's just a great question to say, hey, you've done something terrible before, so why are we gonna believe you now? Are you really? Because when it comes down to, you could say, are you really a different person? Especially since the guy is probably in his late 60s. Back then, he was in his late 40s. Probably a lot of what he's said, and a lot of what he's done lately hasn't really shown that he's gonna actually try to, help out the people in, Central America. So this is just a really powerful set of questions she asked him. And she just needs to keep on doing shit like that, because we really need to hold the people in our federal government accountable when they do things like trying to overthrow other governments, like we're trying to overthrow the Venezuelan president right now, and how we continue to try to do these regime change wars like in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, not Afghanistan, but Syria, and what we did in Libya. And it's just creating all sorts of chaos and death and destruction. And it's not benefiting anybody but the war profiteers. She didn't go into it's just benefiting the war profiteers part, but she's really going after our war economy and our war machine, because we really need to stop that so we could really start representing the people, starting with people here in the United States. Then we could start representing people around the world in a roundabout way by making sure we're not overthrowing their governments and not killing them just for the sake of killing them or to steal their natural resources. Then I also want to talk about Amazon. This article is from last month. And like I said before, I'm not really able to put in the time like I want to. So I'm actually kind of missing out on shooting some news videos that I really want to talk about. But I had to go back a little bit for this one, because Amazon is not going to pay a dime in federal taxes this year. This is on truthdig.org. .com. Okay, because according to a new report from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, which examined Amazon's public filings, the online retailer reported a $129 million federal income tax rebate for 2018, good for a tax rate of -1% or 22% below the federal corporate income tax rate. Amazon's profits this year were $11.2 billion versus $5.6 billion in 2017. This is a great example of corporate handouts and corporate welfare, because the U.S. government is giving millions upon millions of dollars of tax breaks or different incentives that Amazon is not obligated to pay. So whenever anybody says, oh, this person's on welfare, this poor person's on welfare, this is all terrible, these guys are lazy bums, what about Amazon? So far, they're a welfare queen getting millions of dollars in tax rebates when they owe the American people millions and millions of dollars of tax money, because they're probably the wealthiest corporation in the United States. They're not doing anything to make sure they're contributing to our own government and our society, and that's how you contribute to the society as a whole, is by paying taxes. Then the government goes and distributes goods and mostly services to all the people that are necessary, and not just the people but corporations, because corporations also need these services too, like good roads and making sure the airline's running, to make sure that people could go back and forth and travel, especially to work, to these corporations to generate those profits. So it's not like the corporations don't have an obligation to support their communities and support society. There's definitely a few other big multinational corporations that aren't paying their fair share of taxes either, but Amazon just might be the easiest one to look at because they're like the biggest online retailer. Then it also says here that Amazon has also benefited from the Supreme Court's decision last year to overturn its 1992 ruling in Quill versus North Dakota, which had allowed the company's online competitors to avoid sales taxes and thereby offer competitive pricing. Huffington Post Antonia Blumberg notes that Amazon already charges the consumer a sales tax in all 45 states where one exists, along with Washington, D.C. Then this is all pretty bad news, but there's a little bit of a silver lining in this story, because they talk about how... Also, I remember that Richard Wolff, he did a news story about how when Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, was looking for another corporate headquarters, really just wanted to open up another set of another set of corporate offices in another state. That he got 200 different cities to just openly reveal all their like financial and city planning, while they were trying to get Amazon to move into their city. And he talked about how it was a huge advantage because they were able to get access to just tons and tons of, private information that other businesses weren't able to get. So they're able to beat their competitors by using that information to, make profits where these other companies couldn't. Oh, that's another negative for what Amazon's been doing. But what we've been able to do is that we are able to force Amazon to scrap their plans to build a new corporate campus in Long Island City, New York. And it was because of fierce backlash from labor organizers, local communities, and their representatives. So I thought it was over. They're going to open up another set of corporate offices, be able to take in tons and tons of more public money that they really shouldn't get at all. But luckily, people forced them out. So the people have won so far with that part of the deal. So that's good. So then the people of New York and the New York City government can actually do things that's going to actually help the people of New York. Because Richard Wolff talked about how they really need to fix the subway system. It's one of the dirtiest in the world and it's poorly maintained. So hopefully they'll put that money to the subway system. Because the poor and the working class need a good form of transportation to be able to get to work, to school, to the grocery store, any other place they need to go. And the city of New York needs to be able to provide that for people, because that's part of their obligations, to make sure that people could do what they need to do on a daily basis. Then if the city of New York doesn't do that, then the people suffer. But here's my recent news article that I want to talk about. This is on World Socialist website, but VW is planning on cutting more jobs, and this is important because GM also announced a month or so ago that they're going to plan on cutting a few thousand jobs. I think World Socialist website also has an article about how Ford's going to plan on slashing thousands of jobs too. So this is why capitalism isn't working for the majority of people, because to make sure all these corporations increase their profits, they're going to do everything they need to do to make sure they keep on making more and more profits. If that includes cutting your job and getting rid of your job so they can make more profits, that's what they're going to do. It doesn't matter if you're going to have a hard time finding another good paying job, so you could make sure you have a good quality of life, make sure all your needs are taken, especially if you live in a certain town or a certain city where that's the big employer, and if they kill your job, you're going to suffer trying to find another well-paying job, or have to go and get a poor job that's not going to pay you very well at all. The companies don't give a shit about that, because they're all about making sure they're making profits. They're not working to make sure they're providing quality service and goods for the community. Government could do that, but corporations, by and large, can't do that because they have to make a profit, first and foremost. Okay, because the German automaker Volkswagen Group has announced thousands of layoffs at its VW and Audi brands. The slashing of up to 7,000 jobs by the world's second largest automaker is part of the ongoing jobs bloodbath in the global auto industry. The move by VW follows GM's announcement of 14,000 job cuts, the closure of 5 plants in the U.S. Speculation that Ford may cut 25,000 jobs, mostly in Europe, and tens of thousands of job cuts in China by U.S. and Korean-based automakers. The global job cutting is largely being driven by the powerful financial interests that are pushing car companies to increase returns to investors. Even as vehicle sales stagnate, companies spend billions on the fierce competition over electric and self-driving cars. Okay, I'll go skip down a little bit, because a lot of it's just going into the details of the investors really need VW to make a profit, so they gotta look at a whole bunch of different things like cutting labor costs, such and so forth. Alright, job and wage cuts are not the only options being considered. The shutdown of entire plants or production sectors is not being ruled out. This is why we need to move towards a socialist economy and have a more of a socialist government system. Is because, well, these corporations are firing more and more people as time goes on, so they increase their profits. Then the public sector needs to say, okay, we're going to provide these people with jobs. And also not just provide them with jobs, but make sure they're well-paying jobs. They all have good health, good benefits like health care and pensions. Because from what I understand, businesses don't really provide pensions. They just provide 401ks. So that doesn't really guarantee you have a good income after you retire. Because, of course, you're putting all this work in to make profits for these companies, and you're not getting paid nearly what you're producing. So that's why we need to start bringing back pensions with a social type of system. But actually, the pension would be more of the pension would actually be just a bigger increase in Social Security payouts. But in that would be it. Along with, we could go and just implement UBI, Universal Basic Income. Everybody gets about $1,200 a month. That would also be a create benefit to poor and working class people. So we could really provide for the people. And then also do things like make sure we're building and creating affordable housing for poor and working class people, and make sure they're quality homes and not just poorly built trailers and poorly built apartment buildings and stuff like that. So we could really do a whole bunch of different things to make sure that people are getting taken care of, because that's what socialism is about, is making sure we're taking care of people first and then everything else comes after that. Versus capitalism's all about making sure profits are the number one goal and the number one priority in that economic system. And yeah, you could do reforms like Bernie Sanders wants to do, is do a bunch of reforms and make sure capitalism works better. But since capitalism breaks and it goes into recessions and depressions every 4 to 7 years, that's really not a good system, because it's too unstable, and it makes sure that there's way too much income inequality, so way more people suffer than really need to. And as long as we have a capitalist system, we're always going to have this issue of companies are going to keep doing this, like cutting jobs, want to talk about lowering people's wages, so on and so forth, to make sure they make more profits. And we, the people, are just going to continue to suffer.